I didn't do anything wrong, just spoke the truth out loud. That's what I told myself when I said my boyfriend was weaker than his own trainer. But the next thing I knew, he left me. And instead of begging to come back, he showed up with legal papers that ended everything. My name is Isolde Crane, and I am 31 years old. People always tell me I have a sharp tongue, but I call it honesty. I believe saying what you think is better than pretending. That was how I explained the way I spoke about Ethan, my boyfriend. He is 34, a fitness coach, reliable and calm, but sometimes I thought he lacked spark. When we first met, I admired his discipline, the way he woke early, ate clean meals, and worked long hours at the gym. But after a while, his steady habits felt like dull routine. I wanted something more exciting, something that made me feel special. That is when Damien, his co-worker and younger trainer at the gym, caught my attention. Damien was 29, with energy and charisma Ethan never showed. He joked with me when I stopped by, flexed his muscles with a grin, and treated me like I was more than just Ethan's girlfriend. I started making comparisons, at first only in my mind, then in little remarks. I told Ethan one night that Damien pushed his clients harder, and that maybe he could learn from him. Ethan looked at me carefully and said he was experienced enough to do his job his way. I shrugged and told him I was just being helpful. The truth was, I enjoyed watching his face when I said things like that. I liked testing how far I could go. My sister Tara laughed when I told her about it. She said men need reminders not to get too comfortable, and if Ethan wanted to keep me, he should work harder. Her words felt like support, so I leaned into it more. Ethan's mother, Martha, however, noticed my tone. She asked one afternoon why I spoke so sharply to him. I told her I was only motivating him. She frowned and said, respect was the base of love. I rolled my eyes. Respect was boring. Sparks came from challenges. One evening, after coming back from the gym, Ethan was quiet. I asked what was wrong, and he said nothing. Later, while I was in the kitchen with Tara, I made a joke that Damien could lift more in his sleep than Ethan could on his best day. I laughed loudly, thinking Ethan was still in the shower, but when I turned, I saw him standing in the doorway. His face was unreadable. He didn't say a word. He just walked out of the room, past us, and into the bedroom. Tara whispered that maybe I had gone too far. I brushed it off, saying Ethan was too sensitive. But later that night, when he lay in bed with his back to me, silent, I felt a flicker of unease. He had never left the room without a word before. I told myself it didn't matter, that he would get over it like always. Yet something in the way he had looked at me stayed in my mind. A week later, Ethan and I joined friends and family for dinner at a restaurant. It was supposed to be a relaxed evening, but I could not resist turning the conversation toward the gym. Damien had just won some local competition, and I brought it up as soon as we sat down. I described how impressive he looked, how disciplined his training was, how all the clients admired him. People nodded politely, and I noticed Ethan shift in his seat. He tried to join in by talking about his own clients and how much progress they had made. I cut him off with a laugh and said no one was asking for his work stories, that Damien's results spoke louder. Some of our friends chuckled nervously, while others looked down at their plates. I ignored the awkwardness and kept going, saying even Damien's posture showed more strength. Ethan grew quiet, and Martha, his mother, leaned forward with a glare. She asked why I felt the need to praise another man while sitting next to my partner. I brushed her off, saying I was simply giving credit where credit was due. Ethan excused himself halfway through the meal, saying he had an early morning. I rolled my eyes and told everyone he was being dramatic. My sister Tara tried to cover for me, saying I only had a sharp sense of humor, but I could feel the tension around the table. Chloe, his daughter, hardly touched her food and stayed quiet the whole evening. When we returned home, I found Ethan sitting at the small desk in our bedroom, writing something carefully in a notebook. I asked what it was, and he said it was nothing important, just things he needed to keep track of. I teased him, calling him dull for always working even in his free time. He didn't look up, only kept writing. I told him he was jealous of Damien's success, and if he wanted me to stop mentioning it, maybe he should step up. He still didn't respond, which frustrated me even more. I told myself his silence meant he had no defense, that I was right, but watching him bent over that notebook, steady and focused, unsettled me in a way I couldn't name. I brushed it off and went to bed, telling myself Ethan was weak for not speaking up. Yet when I closed my eyes, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at me across the restaurant, like he was memorizing every word I said. At a friend's house the following weekend, the tension between us only grew. A group of us gathered in the living room with drinks and music, and Damien happened to be there too. The moment he walked in, I brightened. I made sure to sit near him, laughing at his jokes, asking about his training sessions, leaning a little too close when he showed something on his phone. Ethan sat on the other side of the room, quiet, watching. At one point, someone teased that Damien must be the strongest guy in town, and I quickly added that he was definitely stronger than most people, even stronger than some who should be in better shape. Everyone laughed lightly, but I saw Ethan's jaw tighten. Later, when he stepped outside for air, I followed him. He asked why I kept comparing him to Damien. I told him he was imagining things, that he was insecure, and that I was only being friendly. He said it didn't feel friendly to him. I waved it off and told him he needed thicker skin. When we returned inside, Damien handed me a drink before Ethan could. I smiled and took it, making sure Ethan saw. My sister Tara whispered that I was pushing too far, but I laughed it off and told her Damien was just fun. Ethan's daughter Chloe had come along for part of the evening, and she sat curled on the couch with a book. I noticed her looking at me when I laughed too loudly with Damien. She turned away, her face pale, and later she asked quietly if her dad was upset. I told her he was just tired, but she didn't look convinced. When we got home, Ethan barely spoke. I tried to pick a fight, saying he was sulking like a child, but he didn't rise to it. Instead, he went straight to his desk again. This time he had a stack of folders. I stood in the doorway watching him slide papers inside them, neat and deliberate. I asked what he was doing. He said only that it was important work. His voice was calm, too calm. I mocked him, saying he was hiding behind numbers and papers instead of being a man. He didn't respond, and that silence unnerved me more than if he had shouted. I went to bed annoyed, telling myself he was too weak to face me directly. But lying awake, I kept picturing his focused hands on those folders. It was like he was building something I wasn't supposed to see. I decided if Ethan wanted to sulk in silence, I would show him how little it mattered to me. I spent more time at the gym, making sure Damien noticed my new clothes and the way I smiled at him. When Ethan walked past us, I laughed extra loudly just to see if he would react. He never did. He finished his sets, nodded politely, and walked away. That lack of reaction irritated me more than any argument could. I started telling myself he was too insecure to confront me, that I was winning. At home, the air grew heavier. Chloe avoided me, spending more time in her room with schoolwork. Once, she whispered that she missed when her dad used to smile. I told her he was just busy, but the way she looked at me made me feel exposed. Martha visited one evening and noticed Ethan's silence. She pulled me aside in the kitchen and said he deserved respect. I snapped back that he should earn it. She gave me a look I couldn't shake, full of disappointment. That night, Ethan came home later than usual. When he walked in, he was carrying a slim envelope. He didn't shout, didn't accuse, just placed it on the table in front of me. I opened it expecting something trivial, maybe a bill. Instead, I saw photocopies of bank statements, notes in his handwriting, and, most shocking, photos of me with Damien at the gym, laughing too close, his hand brushing mine. My chest tightened, but I forced a laugh. I told him he had misunderstood, that it was innocent, that I couldn't believe he would go to such lengths just to make me look guilty. He didn't argue. He simply said this was only part of what he had collected. His voice was steady, calm, like someone who had already made up his mind. I tried to twist it back on him, saying he was paranoid and controlling, that no healthy man would spy on his own partner. He didn't rise to it. He just looked at me in that same unsettling way, the way he had at the restaurant, like he was memorizing my every word. I felt a cold weight in my stomach. For the first time, I realized his silence wasn't weakness, it was patience. He was waiting, and whatever he was waiting for, I wasn't going to like it. The breaking point came at a family gathering we hosted a few weeks later. I had invited friends, relatives, and even a few people from the gym, wanting to show off the life I thought I controlled. I put on my best dress, poured drinks, and made sure Damien was there too. I wanted people to see me glowing, wanted them to compare me with Ethan and see who really deserved me. At first, the night went as I planned. I laughed loudly, leaned on Damien's arm when he told a story, and made small digs about how Ethan was always too serious. Some chuckled, but others looked uncomfortable. Martha sat stiffly in her chair, eyes on her son. Chloe clung to Ethan's side, watching me with that same pale face as before. Then Ethan stood. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said he had something to share. The room grew quiet as he set a folder on the table. He began to speak in a calm, steady tone, naming dates, times, and places. He pulled out receipts from restaurants, photos of me with Damien at the gym, copies of text messages that made my stomach twist. Gasps filled the room. Some of our friends exchanged shocked glances, others whispered. I tried to laugh it off, saying he was exaggerating, that I was only being friendly, but the evidence lay on the table in plain sight. Martha stood and said she always knew I disrespected Ethan, and now everyone could see it. Tara avoided my eyes, her face flushed. Damien muttered something about leaving and slipped out the door without saying goodbye. That betrayal stung more than I expected. I tried to accuse Ethan of humiliating himself, saying he was petty, but no one sided with me. They only looked at me with disgust or pity. Ethan closed the folder gently and said he had already spoken to his lawyer. He announced that custody protections for Chloe were being arranged and that financial matters would be settled legally. His voice was calm, final, the voice of someone who had already won. I stood frozen, my throat tight, as he thanked everyone for listening and walked out of the room. The party I had planned to shine in had turned into my public trial, and I had no defense left. The silence after that night never left me. A week later, I was sitting across from Ethan in a law office, fluorescent lights buzzing above, the smell of paper and ink filling the air. He looked calm, dressed in his usual simple clothes, but the way he carried himself made him seem taller, stronger. The lawyer slid a set of documents across the table, and I knew, before even reading them, what they were. Divorce papers, custody protections, financial separation. My stomach turned as I flipped through page after page, each one written in cold, official words that spelled out the end of everything. I tried to keep my composure. I said this was unnecessary, that we could work it out privately. Ethan shook his head and said everything had to be formal now. He said too many words had been twisted in the past, and he wanted no more confusion. His tone was calm, not angry, but it left no room for argument. I tried to remind him of our years together, saying I had only pushed him with my comments because I wanted him to grow. I said he should have understood that I never meant to truly hurt him. The lawyer looked at me like she had heard this all before, and Ethan's face didn't change. He said respect should not have to be begged for. He said he had given me patience, but patience was not weakness. I told him he was throwing away our family over mistakes that could be forgiven. He asked me flatly where Damien was now. The question cut me open. Damien hadn't returned my calls or messages since the night of the gathering. He had vanished the moment things became messy. I had built everything around him, around the idea that I could trade stability for excitement, but all I had left was a silent phone and a motel memory. I tried to turn it back on Ethan, accusing him of being heartless for taking Chloe away from me. He said Chloe was his daughter, and she deserved stability. He reminded me how she had looked at me, quiet and withdrawn, while I laughed with another man. He said children see more than adults want to admit. I felt heat rising in my face, shame mixing with anger. I said he was cold, that he was punishing me to make himself look strong. He shook his head and said strength was not about control, it was about protecting what mattered. For the first time, I understood he no longer saw me as part of what mattered. The lawyer went over the financial terms, and my throat closed. Ethan had protected himself carefully. The accounts, the apartment, even joint savings were secured on his side. The papers showed he had been preparing for months, gathering receipts, tracking expenses. Every late night I mocked him for sitting at his desk. He had been building a case brick by brick. When the lawyer asked if I understood, I could only nod. Ethan signed his name in steady strokes, and the sound of the pen scratching across the page was unbearable. When it was my turn, my hands trembled. I tried one last time, saying we didn't have to end like this, that we could find a way back. He looked at me, not with anger, but with complete detachment, and said it was already over. He stood, thanked the lawyer, and walked out without looking back. I sat there frozen, the papers heavy in front of me, my signature binding me to a future I never wanted. Outside the window, life went on as if nothing had happened. But inside me, everything collapsed. I had called him weak, compared him to another man, mocked him for his silence. Yet here I was, alone in a law office, realizing the man I thought too fragile to fight had outlasted me, outsmarted me, and walked away stronger than I ever imagined. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.